Well, I'm alarmed by the fact that nuclear weapons aren't fully under control in the world. I believe that the 5 original nuclear weapons states, the permanent members of the UN Security Council, have dealt with their nuclear weapons in a fairly responsible way. The whole issue of deterrence during the Cold War was an important aspect of avoiding a Third World War. But the access to the technology for nuclear weaponry is becoming more widespread as science and technology spread into new countries, and regional issues and the struggle for different nations for status in the world and for invulnerability in the world or for deterrence in their own regional issues. And in those remarks I'm thinking of Iran and India and Pakistan and North Korea and Israel, who are the states we think most often about outside the 5 nuclear weapon states, don't have the same practiced handling of their nuclear weapons capability as the original 5 nuclear weapon states, and they aren't covered in the same way by the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And there are severe difficulties because there are states who are not going to be told what to do by the original nuclear weapon states because they don't accept instructions from that quarter. And there are plenty of people around the world, plenty of governments around the world, perhaps the majority of members of the United Nations General Assembly, who believe that the 5 original nuclear weapon states have taken advantage from their early holding of nuclear weapons to create status in international institutions, particularly in the United Nations and in its Security Council, and in their arrangements for their own defence. And they resent that privilege, as it were, of having started first, and they resent the attempt by the 5 NWS to try and cut off the capacity from anybody else, or anybody else who is not firmly within the Non-Proliferation Treaty. So there is the politics of power and nationalistic objectives involved in this. There is the collective awareness of the danger which nuclear weapons represent for the whole world if they were ever used anywhere. And there is the application of the experience of responsible handling of and creation of deterrence from nuclear weapons that could be applied to regional and indeed global situations hereafter. So it's a very complex mix, out of which we must proceed quite carefully. I happen to believe that the institutions on their own, the United Nations, the International Atomic Energy Authority, the various conventions and treaties to do with weapons of mass destruction, the attempts to get ratified and implemented a comprehensive test ban treaty and a fissile material cut-off treaty are not enough on their own, are not strong enough on their own to deal with the politics of the power implications of nuclear weapons, and therefore the whole business into the future of controlling the spread and controlling the politics of nuclear weapons has got to be very carefully handled. Ideally through international institutional mechanisms, but with the big powers and those with actual or potential nuclear capability understanding that the collective issue is increasingly going to become more important than their own nationalistic approach. And that is where I would like the institutions that I personally work with, the United Nations Association of the UK, my contacts that still re-echo from my time at the United Nations, my membership of the Trident Commission in the UK, which is now going to examine the next stages of the UK approach to its military nuclear capability, and my involvement in various regional issues around the world, either as an observer or sometimes as an involved practitioner, and particularly the Middle East. And in the Middle East, I would like to see a nuclear weapons-free zone, because I think the Middle East is such a dangerous place, even without nuclear weapons, that we must try and take nuclear weapons out of it, or bring those who hold some capability, actual or potential, in the Middle East, particularly Israel and Iran, to a point where they understand that the further development of nuclear weapons and, God forbid, the actual use of nuclear weapons is absolutely off the cards and not to be considered as part of their foreign policy and defence stance. I don't think that Israel is going to come into discussions of this issue very easily. It will want to make sure that its own national security is absolutely assured before it will even consider a discussion about the future of its nuclear weapons. But it's got a problem with Iran's potential development of nuclear weapons capability, and there may come a point in the future when the politics of the Middle East settle in a certain way but leave the nuclear issue out, where both Iran may be under a regime different from the one that we have at the moment. We don't know about that. In Israel, maybe with a government of a different character or with circumstances different from the ones we're looking at in 2011, where they see a mutual interest in making sure that the other doesn't have capability, even at the cost of their making concessions on their own capability. And that needs to be explored. And the meeting that's being prepared in 2012 to start a formal international discussion of this, with the encouragement, I think, of the United States, as well as other important powers, and certainly the Europeans, would be a step forward, at least to get a discussion going, even if Israel and Iran are not at the table in the first instance. We must explore the full context for what a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East would mean for all its contributing parts and nations, and what it would mean globally and regionally, and how we could get to a better situation than a face-off between two powers, one of which now has nuclear weapons, everybody assumes, and the other of which we assume is trying to develop them. That is too dangerous a situation not to have this discussion. And there must be not just an invitation to Israel and Iran to contribute to this discussion, but some pressure on them to see that there are issues for other countries than those two in there being a safer regime in the Middle East on weapons of mass destruction of all kinds. This is going to be a long, no doubt, and difficult, tortuous, and sometimes blocked route, but it's one that we've got to try, because in the whole business of looking for a nuclear weapons clean world, even if they're not actually absent, the world must be cleaned of the potential for the use of nuclear weapons. We've got to have high ambitions or we'll get nowhere. And the fact that the United States has produced from 4 extremely senior and knowledgeable statesmen, and Europe has produced a number of approaches from very senior people that encourage us to think that a world free of nuclear weapons could be made possible, is to understand that this is not a hopelessly unrealistic and desperate project. There is some progress that can be made, and I am very interested in seeing progress made.